was a lot better at this time of the day than it usually is when I'm coming in from Claremont and 85. So I appreciate that part. That's about all I appreciate getting up this early for. But I'm happy to be here. Don't get me wrong. So our sermon series has been Follow the Leader. The title of mine is Leaders Eat Last. I'm not really sure how I'm fitting that into what we're talking about because it's a little bit of a stretch. But so it's Mark 33 to 34. If you were in church on Sunday or if you heard Phil's sermon, you may know that he preached the verses right after this. And so I've got two verses that lead into that. There we go. But what I want to talk, which reminds me, what I want to talk about is what do we know about Mark? I'm trying to pad this a little bit because I only have two verses and there's not a whole lot to say about them. But so what we know about Mark is the earliest of the three synoptic gospels. It's believed that Matthew and Luke used Mark and added on to them. They took Mark and either added stories or added information to them, but they used Mark to write theirs. It's believed to have been written in the decade before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, but some, what did I do? I turned it off. But some believe that it was written after the destruction of the temples in 70 CE. So it would have been written with the lens of the temple's been destroyed. And here's what happened back when Jesus was alive. So belief, there's no way we can know who actually wrote this, but the belief is that Mark, who wrote it, if his name was Mark, was a disciple of Peter, the disciple of Christ. He wrote down what Peter told him. All right. His explanations of Jewish customs suggest he was writing for the Gentiles. He was explaining things more to them that they wouldn't have known. And as you probably recall, a lot of times in Mark, you hear Jesus say, don't tell anybody, right? So he characterizes the Messiah as being reluctant to, or Christ as being reluctant to reveal himself as the Messiah. So these are the two verses I have. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the way? But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. All right. So what happens right before this in this chapter in Mark? We have the transfiguration. You guys know what the transfiguration was. Three of them go up on the top of the mountain and Christ becomes white, well, all in white, glowing, all of that. Then there's the coming of Elijah, the healing of the boy with a spirit, and then Jesus foretells his death and resurrection again. And then we have the verses that I just read you. And then after that, we have these two verses, which is what Phil preached on this past Sunday. Sat down, called the 12, and said to them, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. All right. So in the other Gospels, we know Matthew, Mark, and Luke are what we call the synoptic Gospels, right? They are basically tell the same stories. And then John is a little bit different. This same story is in Luke. An argument arose among them as to which one of them was the greatest. But Jesus, aware of their inner thoughts, took a little child and put it by his side and said to them, whoever welcomes this child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For the least among all of you is the greatest. All right, I'm going to hold on to that. So I have a little bit to work with here, but not a whole lot. But what I want to talk about a little bit, I think, is the argument that the disciples would have had. Why would they be arguing about which of, and we're going to assume that they're arguing about which of them was the greatest, because it says they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. I guess that's a good assumption, right? That they're arguing among themselves about who's the greatest. We don't know. That's what it tells us. And I think we just automatically assume that's what they're talking about. Yeah. And then, of course, Jesus's explanation about it, who the first must be last and servant of all. So we want to make this work with leaders eat last. I need your help with that. I'm gonna be quite honest, totally honest with you. I get the arguing, right, between the disciples about who's the greatest of them, who's going to get to sit at the right side of Jesus in heaven, right? Who's going to get to sit on the other side of Jesus, whatever they're arguing about, however they're doing it. But what do we do with that? What do we do with that argument? What do we do with the first becomes last and the last becomes first? And what do we do with, if you're a leader, you're supposed to eat last? There's a book by Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last. I don't know if any of you've read it, but it says that a good leader builds up their followers, right? Or builds up the people who work for them. And one of those ways is to put those folks first in things like this, to not always just specifically or eating last at a meal, but putting their needs, their concerns, their ideas, making them feel like they are important, right? That's what he says a good leader will do. And I don't know if you've ever experienced working for a less than good leader. Anybody? Yeah? Yeah, me too. I think most of you know, I've only been doing ministry for about 10 years. I worked as an internal auditor in a financial institution, and then in an insurance company. I did fraud investigation with the state insurance commissioner's office, and then with an insurance company. So I have had my own set of different kinds of leaders, as everybody else here that has had more than one leader has had. Some people are born leaders, we know, right? And some people need a lot of coaching to be a good leader. So Jesus is a born leader, right? What does Jesus do for his disciples? What does he do for them? We're really quiet today. Are y'all awake?
He doesn't shame them for arguing.
He doesn't shame them. Thank you.
Make it hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Thank you. He doesn't shame them. What? He remains calm. Is that what you said? Okay. Yeah. What else? And I'm not just talking about this argument. What makes Jesus a good leader? Okay. Okay. Do I need to repeat this for the people online?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can they hear it? Okay. The comment was that they must have known he was a good leader because they follow him. Is that right, Jack? Yeah. Okay. What about holding the disciples accountable? Okay. For the things that they do that he doesn't like? Yeah. Does he do that? Do you know of instances where he does that? Holds them accountable?
Get behind me, see?
There's one. Any others you can think of where he does that? Holds them accountable.
Stills the storm. Ye of little faith.
Ye of little faith. Yes. How long does it take for you guys to figure out what I'm trying to tell you? and who I am. Right? I'm sorry? Forever, because we're human. Yeah, very true. Patience. He has patience. Great amount of patience. Yeah. What else? He's willing to repeat himself patiently and persistently, over and over. Consistently. Consistently. Thank you. That's a little different. Consistently. Thank you. He leads by example. That's a big part of it, isn't it? Yeah.
He did those miracles.
Oh, yeah. Miracle things. Yeah. Like healings and stuff. How does that make him a good leader, Andy? How does that make him a good leader?
He demonstrates power and compassion.
Okay.
And I think when he's doing miracles, he's talking clearly to the disciples.
Okay.
He is sending them clear messages.
Okay. About who he is. So Andy says that performing miracles, doing healings, and booting out demons, all of that, he's basically telling the disciples who he is. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So he's showing them what he's going to want them to do later after he's gone. He does send them out to try, doesn't he? And they're not always successful. But he's hoping to train them so that they can not be Christ, but to be his follower even after he's gone. Right? He was humble. Yes. Right. And good leaders are humble, right? That way you like them. Or at least I do. I find that to be helpful.
Jesus chose his disciples. Right? These are kids that washed out in school after secondary school, went home to work in the family business. And the rabbi came and said, follow me.
Yeah. Yeah. So Andy says Jesus picked his disciples. He chose them. Perhaps they weren't the most brightest bulb in the pack, right? But he still picked them to follow him. They did not have to follow him. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they didn't have to follow him, but because what they saw in him, if they had heard about him, who knows, but what they saw in him at the time helped them to decide to follow him. And I think that's one of those, well, I hope it is. There are leaders that pull people in that I'm thinking cult leaders, right? That are not good. There's something about that personality, right? That sucks people in. But in this case, Jesus, being the good leader that he is, has that personality, whatever it is, that pulls people to him, causes them to follow him. Yeah, Bill. He was honest with them about the challenges of being a follower. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So the challenge is Jesus was with them throughout, where there are some leaders, not good leaders, that will leave you to face that challenge on your own. Great point. So what do we argue about today? We have a lot of things we argue about now, right? Politics, right? That's a big one. What else do we argue about? Religion. Okay. Religion's a big one. What you believe and how you read the Bible. What else? What do you argue about with your friends? Or do you? Maybe you don't. Sports teams. Okay. All right. Which one's better? Okay. What's that? Bad calls. Okay. Referees. Anything else? Best way to raise your kids. Yeah. Because everybody has their own opinion on that, right? Uh-huh. Of course they are. They're all wrong. Yeah. You got it down. Anything else we argue about? At work, how to do a job? Yeah. The right way to do it? Okay. How to drive. I wonder who we argue about that with. Oh, how to control your dog. Okay. These sound like personal arguments to me. Yeah.
Money.
Money. Say more about that.
You spend so much.
Why did you spend so much and why did you spend so much on that? Okay. Got it. Got it.
I hear other people argue about that. What I've heard.
Funny. Okay, so what did I do with this thing? They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. So yeah, so the transfiguration, there was only 3 of them total, right? Him and 2 others, right? Yeah, but that's okay. It's cool. Same idea. Why did he pick those 2? Were those 2 favorites? We don't know. Maybe. I'm sure the other people thought he was, right? Or they were. He was picking favorites. Good leaders pick favorites. Do they? They have proteges, right? Or mentees, perhaps, that they've identified that might be not better, but more likely to be leaders than the others.
Different roles.
Yeah, different roles. Okay. Yeah.
Studying perhaps who he wants to give the opportunity to follow him.
Mm-hmm. That there's one that because of he's a rabbi, so he taps them on the shoulder as he sees their qualities, right? Right. Yeah. To lead the group. Yeah.
But I would guess that normally rabbi students would be of different ages. And so it's not just who's going to be the best, but when are you going to break out and become your own? Right. And older apprentices would expect to do that sooner. I don't know what the ages of the disciples were. We always think they're all kind of about the same age, but we know John was younger. He had a brother, Andrew. I don't know which one was older. Okay, or how much difference there was in their age, but like, okay, so they might have different expectations as to when they would bust out, you know, when they would be ready. And that might be why Jesus would choose different disciples to go up the mountain for the transfiguration. Not just on what roles he thinks they will have after he is gone, but where they are in their training program.
Oh, okay. All right. So if we think about Jesus being a rabbi that's training them, perhaps he's identified some of them to be further along than others. That's fair. Yeah. I mean, if you were in a group of 12 and Jesus picked out people other than you, would you understand that? Would you be okay with that they were further along in the process, or would you be, there'd be rivalry there?
And based on the fact that the scriptures don't tell us that any of the disciples were married, that they would probably been in their teens or early 20s at the latest, or they would be married.
Okay.
Well, I know, but other than that, most of the disciples were not married.
How do we know that, David?
Well, we only know that from the fact that it's like, was Jesus married or not? There's no mention of a wife.
Mm-hmm.
So the assumption.
Because it's not mentioned, we assume that they're not married. That is,
But we do hear about Peter's mother-in-law.
Right.
Okay, so we know he was married.
But that was the unusual one.
that's the only one we hear about.
And I saw it on The Chosen.
Yeah.
So it must be true. He saw it on The Chosen, so it must be true.
Historical document that I have.
How many of you here have seen The Chosen? Yeah? Okay. Have any of y'all seen it? No, I haven't seen it either. I understand it's really good. Yeah. As long as you go into it knowing that they're adding an awful lot to what we have. Oh yeah. Just like any movie or show, right? You have to add to it. Otherwise it'd be over in 5 minutes. Okay. So, so these were the questions I came up with at about 12 o'clock last night or 11 o'clock last night. And we already talked about the second one. Where have you dealt with rivalry in your life? That's the one I'd love for you guys to talk to your table about. Where have you dealt with rivalry in your life, in your career, wherever? And then the last one, we talked a little bit about that, but why do you think leaders should eat last, or do you? And then talk about whatever you want to talk about. Thanks, friends. You're too generous. You're too generous. You want this back, or am I doing something? You want this back? Am I doing something at the end?